Okay, video number 3, widget layout. You may recall in the first video I said there were 3 components or 3 aspects common to all GUI toolkits. One was a set of widgets, that is the elements that make up your graphical user interface, menus, buttons and so on. There was a layout manager or a geometry manager of some sort to control how they're laid out and how they move around when widgets or windows get resized. And the third component was a way of binding event handlers, that is program code, to the actual events that the user generates on the graphical user interface. So this video is about the second of those two, that is the geometry management capabilities. There are 3 geometry managers in TK-Enter. There's a grid, a pack and a place geometry manager. I've never used place in my life and I much prefer grid, so that's the only one we're going to use in this course. So this is all about the grid geometry manager. So to explain that, I'm going to my skeleton GUI program here, which imports the bits I need from TK-Enter, creates a new window in the main program, and I'm going to add in a bit of code. So I'm going to sort of do what's on your left there. I'm going to begin by saying the button positions is equal to a list of positions at which I'm going to put buttons. So I just happen to be able to type very quickly. That's that. Saves me making lots of typos. Then I'm going to go through over all of the different button positions for I in range 6. There's 6 different button positions. I'm going to get the row and column from out of the ith element of the button positions array, button positions list. So that extracts the ith element and pulls out that's row 0, column 0, that's row 0, column 1. Then I'm going to create a new button, which I do as before by specifying the parent window that I'm going to put it in, and I have to give it some text, or I want to give it some text, which is going to be button plus whatever particular I I'm using. So that's going to be button 0, button 1, button 2 and so on. And then I'm going to grid the button in at the row and column that I've extracted or that I've assumed or got out of the ith element of button positions. So I do that by saying the parameter row should be set to the current row value and the parameter column should be set to the current column value. Looks a bit odd, but that's what it means. It's not too hard. And I'm going to stop there and just show you what that does. So let's save that one and run that, and we get this image here, which looks, in fact, and is identical to the one in the lecture notes. The lecture notes is a bit more complicated because it's got some extra stuff I haven't typed yet, but there's the first picture. Not hard to understand. You can see that button 0 went in at 0, 0, that's row 0, column 0, button 1 went in at row 0, column 1, and so on. Hopefully you can work those out. Easy enough so far. But as you can see, the layout's a bit cramped. They're all hard up against each other. Wouldn't it be nice if we could pad them out or something? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. What I first of all want to demonstrate is something called spanning, where we position a button over multiple rows or multiple columns. So you'll notice that button 1 has some space on the right and button 2 has some space underneath it. So I'm going to add in a little bit of hack code here. I'm going to say if I is equal to 1, in other words, if we're dealing with button 1, I'm going to call the grid method on that button again. I'm going to add in an extra parameter that I didn't have before, which is going to be called column spanning, and I'm going to set it to 2. And I'm going to do another similar hack on the button 2, which has a bit of row space underneath it. I'm going to set that one's row spanning to row span, sorry, I've mistyped something there. I'll go back and correct it. Row span is 2 and column span is 2. Let's see what happens. So run that, and if you compare that with the version we had before, button 1 was in the 0, 1 location, but it's now spanning 2 columns. So it's actually occupying the 0, 1 and 0, 2 columns, but its size hasn't changed, so it's just been plonked in the middle of them, halfway. Button 2 has done the same on rows, so it's occupying 2 rows, but its size hasn't changed, so it's stuck in the middle. So that's the first little trick I wanted to do. Then the next trick I'm going to do is to space them all out a bit. And to do that, I'm going to change my program a little bit. I'm going to add in what we call padding, pad X and pad Y. So whenever I grid each button in, by default I'm going to give it a padding, an X padding of 10 and a Y padding of, or pad Y of 20. Just to see what that does, we'll run that again. Going to get a slightly different picture from the lecture notes because I haven't finished developing this program yet. You'll now see that the space around all the buttons, and in particular there's 20 pixels. I've drawn in extra grid lines. Don't worry about button 2, I haven't finished with him yet. I've drawn extra space so that there's 20 pixels, that's that amount there, above and below every button, and there's 10 pixels to the left and right of every one. Not button 2, but it is on mine. Ignore that and look at this button. So imagine these virtual grid lines in. Hopefully that makes sense. So what I've done so far, I've introduced the idea of row spanning and column spanning to occupy more than one row or column, and I've introduced padding around them in X or Y direction. I've used the same on all the buttons at this point. Now I'm going to do one other trick. I'm going to introduce the idea of stickiness. So to do stickiness, I'm going to add to this particular button, I'm going to make it sticky north and south. Sorry, east and west on this one. I do that by typing that in. Now you may think that looks wrong, it does look wrong, E and W. Don't I mean the strings, E and W? Actually, no I don't. I mean the constants E and W. They're defined in here. They're tkinter.e and tkinter.w. But because I said import star, I managed to get the raw, unadorned E and W constants coming up. And I'm going to put some stickiness on this one as well. I'm going to make this one sticky north and south, just so you can see stickiness in all directions. So with that variation, I'm still not quite at the point that the lecture notes got. I've got that version. So this button has now been made sticky east and west. You may recall in the previous slide, it was centered, well, previous plus a bit, it was centered in its two columns. Now it's stretched out so it occupies both columns by being made sticky both east and west. And the button number 2 has been made sticky north and south, subject to the constraints of the padding. So this button is it's still got 10 pixels of padding around it, left and right, and this button has still got 20 pixels of padding above and below. So to show that slight change here, I'm going to add in a padding. Sorry, I'm not going to add in, I'm going to remove the padding. Pad Y equals 0 for that particular button. And so button 2, I've just taken the padding off. So now when I run it, it goes right to the top of its cell and right to the bottom of its cell because the padding in Y has been removed. And if you compare that with the version in the lecture notes here, they're essentially identical, except that the lecture notes look like they cheated a bit, and I actually made this window a little, I must have dragged it down before I took the screenshot. So it should look like that. Right, so I've added, in this lecture notes, I've added padding around a widget. I've added stickiness to stretch it out so that it sticks to the edges. And I've done column spanning, so it does spanning north and south. And there's just one other thing I want to do, and that's yet another trick called internal padding. So you can pad around a button, and you can also pad inside a button. So I'm going to demonstrate that by, let me just check my lecture notes here. I'm going to put iPad Y on button 1. So we're going to do iPad Y is 20. So button 1, prior to that, looked like this. I'm going to make it fatter by putting a little bit of white space inside it. 20 pixels worth of white space inside it. And when I do that, we get that there, which is near enough, hopefully exactly, in fact, apart from differences in version of the operating system and sizes and so on, is the same picture as that. Internal padding for the button. So it's been stretched this way by stickiness and that way by internal padding. And that's all I have for this particular lecture. And in the next lecture I'll talk about some rather more advanced refinements on layout management, such as frames and what else was I going to do in there? Ooh, I'll have to cheat. Ah yes, resize behavior. See you next lecture. Bye.